And at 10, Peter Parker. With Miles having all the powers of Spider-Man with a couple extra to boot, it's bound to be expected that he would eventually surpass his idol/mentor Peter Parker. However, we expected it after some training and a lot of experience. We see this come to pass though in the pages of Spider-Man. Miles and Peter run into each other in costume and they don't know each other's identity. So Pete demands that Miles unmask himself and, state his name. However, they get into a bit of an altercation because of that. And thanks to the help of a few additions Miles made to his suit, including stingers that cause paralysis and electrified webbing, Miles does end up gaining the upper hand and knocking Peter down. Which I have to say shouldn't really have been the case. Like, they should have shown us that the more experienced Spider-Man could still win, since experience is the real currency of the world, but nonetheless, it happened, so it goes on the list. And at 9, Deadpool. Deadpool is such a charismatic character that you'd think he'd pair perfectly with the quick-witted, constantly quipping Webhead. However, in one episode of the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, Peter was introduced to the one and only Wade Wilson, the merc with a red leather-covered mouth. Kinky. The fight quickly turns into Peter and Wade literally slapping each other, so it's safe to say that this is bound to be interesting. However, Deadpool somehow pulls Peter into his mind, turning the fights from a fisticuffs to Deadpool hunting a Spider-Man whale with a harpoon, a la Lewis Brinley, and getting trampled with giant animals and verbal puns that caused physical harm. Deadpool is literally a bard using vicious mockery in this scene, and I don't think that anyone can fight me on that point. Straight up, this whole episode is hilarious, and the fact that Deadpool can't say the word kill just makes me think about YouTube censors. So it's relatable too. And at 8, Fantastic Four. In the Amazing Spider-Man issue 1, we get thrown right into the action with a crossover with the Fantastic Four. But not a fantastic crossover, since the group was actually in the midst of fighting Spider-Man. Spidey took on all 4 members at once, webbing them all up in a way that disabled their powers, including basically hog-tying Mr. Fantastic. The thing is, no pun intended, this fight was all Spider-Man's fault. He wanted to join the Fantastic Four, and figured the best way to convince them to let that happen was to infiltrate their base and kick their asses. However, he learns that joining the team won't actually make him any money, so he called them cheap and leaves, which I find utterly hilarious. He hit the Human Torch with a baseball bat made of web, for crying out loud. How is a 5th member supposed to join the Fantastic Four? Wouldn't it be like the Fantastic Five at that point? Or is Ben getting kicked out? He can go be somebody's pet rock, right? And at 7, Iron Man. Iron Man and Spider-Man may have a father-stepson-like bond in the MCU, however, things in the comments are much more professional than that, aside from the Iron Spider storyline, I guess. There are multiple instances of Iron Man and Spider-Man fighting and Peter coming out on top, like in Amazing Spider-Man number 536, where he had some assistance from the Venom symbiote and actually exploded the Iron Man suit from the inside out. This was during the Civil War storyline where Tony believed that heroes needed to register their secret identities to be able to continue fighting. After this, however, Spidey does join Iron Man's team and reveals his identity as a result. This then leads to the One More Day storyline that some people believe to be the story No Way Home is inspired by. However, now Spidey takes on Iron Man as Peter Parker, using his organic webbing to string him up real good. There was also the Amazing Spider-Man number 588 fight where Tony shuts down the Iron Spider suit with a voice command, but Peter had built in a counter voice command and surprises Tony, managing to web him up and flee. The counter voice command, I guess, was also surprised. So that's pretty funny. And at 6, X-Men. This is certainly another interesting number, since Spider-Man had struggled against singular X-Men before, such as Nightcrawler and Wolverine. However, in the Secret Wars storyline, he took on the whole X-Men team at once and won. In Secret Wars number 3, Spider-Man was eavesdropping on the X-Men to learn their plans. When he heard meeting with Magneto among other things, he decided to drop in and say hi. I guess his body and powers just go into overdrive when he fights teams because, just like with the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man was easily able to dodge Wolverine, Nightcrawler, and more, even though he struggled one-on-one. He really wrecked them, webbing Colossus and Nightcrawler, hanging rogue from the ceiling, and just obliterating the entire team. Even Wolverine pointed out that they were all lucky all he wanted was information and then an escape, because, quote, he really clobbered us. Halfway through into number 5, Captain America. Within the pages of Civil War II, we expected a battle much like the last Civil War, with moral alignments being similar, along with a couple deaths. However, we were shocked when a battle between heroes was interrupted. This vision that took us away from the action actually ended with an image of Miles Morales holding a dead Captain America. It seemed to be that Miles had also killed him, with blood dripping out of his hand and covering his suit. Would this really come to pass though? Civil War II was based on the belief in using the visions of an inhuman known as Ulysses to prevent disasters before they occurred, and heroes that felt taking action based on these prophecies were irresponsible, which is where this vision of Miles killing Cap came from, since these visions resulted in preventing multiple tragedies but also got War Machine and Hulk killed. But we did see an explanation play out in Secret Empire number 7, when a rage-filled Spider-Man nearly beat Captain America, who was remade by Hydra using the Cosmic Cube, to death after Cap had killed Black Widow. But that's all in the past. 5 years in the past to be exact. In it for Wonder Woman. Despite Marvel and DC always being viewed as rivals, they have had multiple occasions where they've had to come together. One such time was in the Superman and Spider-Man comic, which saw the two heroes join together to take on Dr. Doom. The Hulk and Wonder Woman also made an appearance in an attempt to satisfy more fans, and so we could hope that Superman and Hulk would dish it out. However, Dr. Doom very briefly got Spider-Man and Wonder Woman to fight because he said the two were enemies. And while Wonder Woman believed him, Spidey is from this universe, so he knows better than to take Dr. Doom at his word. So Diana tried to capture the bug in her net, which in this case is a giant lasso that makes you tell the truth. But Spider-Man ended up gaining the advantage by simply turning off the lights and letting his Spidey sense do the work, after dodging the lasso quite a bit, might I add. Spider-Man ended the fight by simply tapping her on her shoulder and basically saying, "See, I could kick your right now, but I'm not. I'm one of the good guys." And that was enough for Diana to stand down, apparently. Getting close to the end in number 3, Hulk. Usually when Spidey fights someone stronger or more powerful than himself, he needs to think on his feet and outsmart them in some way. And you think that would be easy with the Hulk, given that he's just a giant brute with anger issues. But actually, that's not how this one played out at all. In True Believers Spider-Man vs. the Hulk number 1, Hulk challenged Spider-Man at a horrible time. At least, a horrible time for the Hulk. Since Spider-Man had just acquired a new set of abilities which increased his strength, speed, and gave him the ability to go airborne without webs. Spider-Man at this point was actually stronger than the Hulk, so he was trying to avoid a fact for lack of causing permanent damage. Unaliving him, if you will. But when Hulk started to endanger nearby kids, Spider-Man punched him and literally sent him into space. Since he was outside Earth's atmosphere, Spider-Man realized that he wasn't coming back down and flew up to help him, bringing him back down to Earth where he could breathe and not, freeze to death. It's pretty hardcore. Penultimately, in at number 2, Superboy. Marvel vs. DC is one of the best crossovers when looking at these lists. The fights from that crossover were decided by votes, so with Spider-Man being the most popular character Marvel has ever released, you can be sure that he'd end up winning against Superboy, despite the potentially unrealistic scenario that caused. However, it was explained away pretty easily when Superboy broke a water tower and flooded the roof they were fighting on. All it took after that was a conveniently placed high voltage box and some crashing to end the fight for Superboy. I don't know if Spider-Man was aware of this vulnerability, but either way, it went how it went. It also feels like I should mention that the Spider-Man fighting Superboy was Ben Reilly, the Spider-Man clone who goes on to become the Scarlet Spider. And DC fans don't seem to like it when you bring up this fight, with multiple users on a certain forum telling someone who mentioned it to jump on a bed of nails, which I have to say, I've heard better insults, come on. Finally, in at number 1, Silver Surfer. Sure, Hulk is strong and Superboy is part Kryptonian, but Silver Surfer is literally a cosmic being, a herald of Galactus. This man is nuts. And while yes, the fight with him may not really have been there overall, Spidey still technically came out on top, and that's what matters. In Silver Surfer number 14, the flying second place Emmy had a crossover encounter with Spider-Man while surfing over the city, and cause plot to make characters fight, a misunderstanding ensued. So Spidey immediately attacked the Silver Surfer. Let's be honest, on a good day, Surfer would usually just obliterate Spider-Man no problem, or just like flick him and he'd be fine. But on this occasion, the Surfer was actually already weak from a previous encounter, and on top of that, he just didn't want to fight. The Silver Surfer repeatedly tried to avoid battling Spider-Man and even saved Spidey from falling off a building, but Spider-Man wouldn't let up, knocking the Surfer off his board and taking the fight to him on the rooftops. Silver Surfer finally just got fed up with the violence and then made a decision to retreat, but first had to save a child who had taken his board. I mean, like, come on, you could have at least given the kid a few minutes. Him saving the kid is what finally clued Spider-Man in that the Surfer was a good guy, but technically, Spidey wins by default. He didn't die, so that's a win to me. That's what matters. In at 10, Chameleon. Being the first villain Spider-Man ever faced way back in Amazing Spider-Man number 1 in 1963, I think CHAMELEON is more underrated than he should be. Being able to look like anyone at any time is pretty damn overpowered. Especially when you can use it to look like Spider-Man and use suction cups to stick to walls, even if that's slightly unrealistic. This character is especially powerful when he has superpowers, like in the 90s animated Spider-Man series, where he could simply look at you and end up transforming into you. That's actually insanely overpowered when you look at it like that, since he can also transform his clothes in that show. He could be fleeing from Spider-Man and then turn the corner and be anyone, so it's certainly someone to fear, unless they're the original version who has to use disguises and makeup to look like anyone they want, since that process takes time and it can't really be turned on or off at will. In at 9, Mysterio. First appearing in The Amazing Spider-Man number 13 from 1964, Quentin Beck does not possess any superhuman abilities. He is a formal special effects artist, illusionist, and actor who uses his talents to commit crimes. He is a founding member of the Sinister Six as well, which is an impressive feat on its own considering how he has no powers. In the first battle with Spider-Man, after he frames Spider-Man for robbing the Midtown Museum, Mysterio obstructs the hero's spider sense with gas and dissolves his webbing with chemical abrasive. However, Spider-Man tricks Mysterio into revealing that he was the actual one who robbed the museum. Then Spider-Man revealed that he had captured that moment on tape. Mysterio was then sent to jail, blaming Spider-Man for his ruined career. However, the abilities of Mysterio are actually really impressive, with a lot of his powers seemingly only being able to be accomplished with CGI and post-production rather than with practical effects, which is what he was using. And I was actually going to be a special effects artist. I even started going to school for it, so trust me, his stuff is absolutely insane. And at 8, Venom. The symbiote that later became known as Venom was created by the Dark Elder God Null on a desolate nameless planet, where it saved a group of newborn baby rodenttoid aliens by bonding to them and transforming them into apex predators. The symbiote's first human host though was DEADPOOL, who came across its prison while on Battleworld and, hoping for a makeover, wore the creature for a few minutes before realizing it was alive and trying to take over his mind. Concerned that his insanity would adversely affect it, DEADPOOL returned the symbiote to its prison moments before the arrival of Spider-Man, whose own suit had been damaged in the battle that was going on outside that DEADPOOL just seemingly was ignoring. Spider-Man had found the prison module that the symbiote was trapped in and activated the machine, which released the symbiote in the form of a black sphere. When Spider-Man touched the sphere, it covered his body and transformed into the iconic black and white costume with large white spider emblems on the chest and back derived from Null's dragon emblem actually. Venom, even though the concept was bought from a fan for what would now be worth $550, became one of, if not the most iconic Spider-Man villain, and with the ability to block out the spider sense, it's a surprise Peter even managed to come out on top. And at 7, Spider Carnage. Spider Carnage is my favorite alternate version of Spider-Man. From what I could find being introduced in the Spider-Man animated series in the 1990s, this version of Peter Parker shared most of his life with his actually good counterpart. However, the difference between the two was that at some point Aunt May also died, being buried next to Uncle Ben. But thanks to some messing around with interdimensional portals, a version of the Carnage symbiote sensed Peter's anger and combined with him, turning him into Spider Carnage, a villain set on revenge and the destruction of all realities. Peter Parker with the Carnage symbiote and then a desire to destroy reality, oh my god. However, he was ultimately defeated when the main series Peter brought the Uncle Ben from another universe to talk to Spider Carnage and actually brought him down and made him sacrifice himself to save all reality. Damn, I love this show, I really do. If you haven't seen it, it's on Disney+. Please watch it if you can, it's so good. And at 6, Morlun. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2 number 30 in 2001, Morlun is one of the most influential Spider-Man villains of all time. Morlun is potentially the biggest threat Spider-Man has ever faced, even if he isn't the most powerful, since defeating him ended up requiring a whole multiverse of spider people, or as the comics were calling them, spider totems, to take him down. Coming from Earth 1, Morlun uses these spider totems to stay alive, feeding on their energy and casually just hopping around from universe to universe, squashing their spider person. This guy is the backbone of the Spider-Verse concept, and a load of spider totems had to team up in order to actually beat him, but not without massive casualties. So definitely a powerful villain that ended up losing overall, but maybe I guess he didn't lose since he did kill off multiple spider people before his actual defeat. Well, I mean, I guess it depends on how he looks at defeat and what his definition of the term is, since some people could consider killing one person a success, so who knows? Halfway through, and at number 5, Venom 2099. Venom 2099 is actually Kron Stone, the son of Tyler Stone, and as revealed later on, the older half-brother of Miguel O'Hara, who is the Spider-Man of 2099. Talk about family issues. Kron became violent and brutal after suffering for years because of his abusive robot maid. Yeah, this is certainly an interesting origin. Either way, this all drove him into killing Punisher 2099's family. This was also before gaining any superpowers, since the encounter with Jake Gallows, who is Punisher 2099, nearly gets him killed. So Kron flees into the sewer, narrowly escaping with his life. And, you know, since he was absolutely destroyed and hardly clinging to life, he ended up floating down the sewer, eventually running into this strange black ball. This black ball was actually the mutated form of the Venom symbiote that had somehow survived without a host all this time. The symbiote, who was also on the brink of death, bonded to Kron and they became Venom 2099. This new version of the Venom symbiote also had acidic saliva and blood, so that does make him more dangerous than the original Venom. But Miguel was still able to come out on top. Attaboy, Miguel. Spider-Man 2099's costume is so sick, man. And at 4, Carnage. When the Venom symbiote came to rescue its host Eddie Brock from jail, it left an asexually produced offspring behind. This spawn bonded to Cletus Cassidy, a renowned serial killer in the Marvel Universe, through a wound on his hand, merging with his blood and becoming red and black in color. Now going by the name of Carnage, Cletus became a deadly recurring enemy to both Spider-Man and Venom. Eventually, Carnage fought Spider-Man and actually beat him. Realizing that Carnage was another symbiote villain, Spider-Man enlisted the aid of Venom, who was actually retired at the time, to defeat him. After enlisting Venom's aid against Carnage, Spider-Man later used loud noises in an attempt to defeat both Cletus and Venom, which is a stone cold move. However, thanks to Cletus' psychopathic tendencies and the fact that he was created on Earth, he has a lot more abilities than his father, like shooting itself as a projectile and forming razor-sharp weapons to tear through both innocents and his enemies, with chef-like precision, may I add. Getting close to the end, in at number 3, Atrocity. Introduced and only seen in the Spider-Man game Spider-Man Edge of Time from 2011, Atrocity was created after Anti-Venom went into a blind rage, accidentally knocking Otto Octavius and Walker Sloan into Walker Sloan's gateway. Time-traveling gateway, by the way. The three then fused in the space-time continuum. I tried getting Taylor to put this on a list for ages, so here I am putting it here because holy damn, this is a villain. Atrocity would occasionally attack Parker or O'Hara with its teleportation tentacles throughout their journey in the Alchemax building, until it eventually revealed itself and attacked Peter Parker. Atrocity was defeated but would later appear again, attempting to kill Peter Parker at the same time that the CEO of Alchemax was fighting Miguel O'Hara. We, as Parker, manipulated Atrocity into attacking electrified pillars, stunning it. Peter then took this opportunity to remove Atrocity's tentacles and send them through the time gateway. These tentacles were then used to drain the Alchemax CEO of his powers. After both Atrocity and the Alchemax CEO, who is revealed to be Peter Parker, were vulnerable, they were knocked into the gateway together simultaneously, resetting the timeline. This absolute monstrosity is also able to teleport himself through time and space, in the addition to all of his powers. So yeah, an atrocity for sure. Penultimately, in at number 2, Red Goblin. After the collapse of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Carnage symbiote was secured in the Lockbox, a privately run vault at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Agents Crane and Coleman, though, infiltrated the Lockbox and stole the symbiote, delivering it to their employer, Norman Osborn. After receiving the symbiote, Osborn bonded with it to become the new Carnage, hoping that it would be the key to regaining his Green Goblin persona. While the symbiote initially seized control of him, Norman offered to teach it more nuanced and sadistic ways to kill people, an offer that the symbiote eagerly accepted, turning over control to its new host, restoring his appearance and purging his body of the nanites, preventing him from augmenting himself with the Goblin formula. Osborn then used the symbiote to kill Phil Urich, and after pretending to be mortally wounded in a rematch against Spider-Man as the Green Goblin, unveiled his new partner by transforming into the monstrous Red Goblin. Osborn used the symbiote to great effect, incapacitating Spider-Man's allies and loved ones, and bonding a portion of it to his grandson Normie Osborn to turn him into the Goblin Child. Spidey was only able to defeat Red Goblin by taunting Osborn, saying that killing him in that form would only give Carnage the credit and not him, which caused him to rip off the symbiote. Then Spider-Man was able to destroy it. Finally, and at number 1, Graviton. If you're not familiar with Graviton, just know that he's essentially Magneto, but with gravity instead of metal, which is already making you think, oh, and that's exactly right. During the Axe of Vengeance crossover storyline, Graviton essentially crushed Spider-Man in their first encounter, only for Spider-Man to come back and absolutely wipe the floor with him when he got the Captain Universe powers. But that may seem a little cheap when talking about a list of Spider-Man villains. So, how about when Graviton was a part of a group of villains that sought revenge on Spider-Man following the loss of his cosmic powers? Spider-Man was still able to defeat Graviton without the power cosmic. During the fight though, Graviton actually disabled Spider-Man's gravity, gravity, sending the web slinger floating up into the sky. But Spider-Man was able to web onto a passing plane before he actually got too high. And then when Spidey got back to the ground and to the fight, he took an unprotected by gravity graviton out with one single punch. So needless to say, Spider-Man has some pretty sick licks to lay out.
Number 10, Sauron. While Sauron might not be the most conventional of mutants in the sense that he wasn't born a mutant, he was mutated from a human to Pteranodon, after suffering an attack from gigantic Pteranodons who escaped the Savage Land. Their bites transformed him so that not only did he now resemble them, but he also found he had the ability and need to feed and drain on the life force energy of others to survive. I think he found that out through his dog too, which is sad. No, not the dog. So while not immune in the same way that the X-Men are, being heavily mutated, I think we can count him as a mutant for the purpose of this list. Spider-Man and his team of X-Men classmates ended up teaming up and defeating Sauron in Spider-Man and the X-Men. And yeah, you heard me right. There is a mini-series where Spider-Man joins the X-Men and is put in charge of a class. Even though he's not quite a mutant, but he's a mutate, so I guess it's fine. Number 9, Deadpool. Speaking of mutates, these two have crossed paths quite a few times now, although I'm still waiting for that MCU team up for them. Come on, Marvel, Disney, make this happen for us. It needs to be a thing. But while Deadpool is usually seen as a huge Spidey fan, and Spider-Man for the most part tries to be good about tolerating Deadpool's ridiculous behavior, and sometimes he's actually even a fan of him too, in the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, Spider-Man gets pulled into Deadpool's zany world to battle. In Deadpool's reality warping mind, Spider-Man becomes just a whale and Deadpool the harpooner that is hunting him with puns. That's right, this actually leads to a pun-off full of verbal insults and zingers, which ends with Spider-Man defeating him by throwing the figurative and literal book at him, the Book of Morality. Nothing knocks out Deadpool like smacking him with the hard and hefty weight of responsibility. And yeah, like I said, I know Deadpool isn't really a full mutant and is considered a mutate, but I was willing to consider him an honorable mutant for this list because I just can't resist an opportunity to talk about Spider-Man and Deadpool's relationship in a video. The bromance is so strong between them. Number 8, Angel. These two ran into one another in an issue of Marvel Team-Up Volume 1, issue number 4, featuring Spider-Man and the X-Men. Like most team-ups, this one starts with the X-Men coming to blows with Spider-Man after Professor Xavier reads an article in the newspaper that tells him that a scientist and a former colleague of his has been kidnapped by the masked vigilante Spider-Man. First up is Warren Worthington III, Angel. Understandably, Angel was no match for Spider-Man, who already had practice when it came to flying enemies thanks to his own villain, the Vulture. He has run-ins with the Vulture pretty early on in his own series, so. Webbing combined with his quick reflexes and acrobatics allowed him to easily beat Angel in one-on-one combat. So yeah, if you think just because you can fly you're gonna be able to get away, no. Number 7, Nightcrawler. The first time these two fought, it was an even match, although I will say that Spider-Man, it looked to me that he actually had the upper hand. It also happened in his own series in Amazing Spider-Man issue 161, which bodes well for our web-singing hero should they have actually needed to come to blows and actually have a fight. This was one of those misunderstanding fights, as team-ups usually go. And like most instances of superheroes fighting one another, this of course was just a misunderstanding. Nightcrawler and Spider-Man both thought that the other actually might be a murderer, who they both happened to trying to be tracked down at the same time. And at the end of the issue, the Punisher would actually show up to complicate things further, then he would get involved. The first fight between Nightcrawler and Spider-Man ends with Spider-Man managing to pin Nightcrawler down, but unfortunately Kurt teleports away before Spidey can turn him into the authorities. But we've also seen Spider-Man full-on beat Kurt in a fight that I'm going to dive into later in this list. Don't worry, I'll come back to it. Number 6, Cyclops. You would think that optic blasts beat Spider-Man, right? Like you could cook a spider with an optic blast, couldn't you? Just blast it apart, or I don't know. Well, you'd be wrong. Cyclops actually has had a few attempts at trying to blast Spider-Man in the comics, but even with his insane level of precision with his optic blast while using his visor, the problem he runs into is he can never actually hit Spider-Man. Spider-Man is simply too agile and always manages to dodge Cyclops' attacks. We also see this in the Marvel team-up issue that I was talking about earlier, issue number 4. And Jean Grey is the one who actually has to step in to get the job done when it comes to capturing Spider-Man, using her telekinesis. And yet, in the same issue, she somehow manages to momentarily get kidnapped by Morbius. She goes from being like the most powerful to being like, oh no, I'm kidnapped. I was like, wait, but can't you just telekinesis Morbius to, I don't know. I'm not writing this, obviously. I'm not writing these old school comics, so it's not up to me. Number 5, Sabretooth. In issue 116 of Spectacular Spider-Man, Peter crosses paths with Sabretooth when he shows up to attack Black Cat, who had just escaped the Foreigner's clutches. Sabretooth was sent to make her pay, and while Felicia doesn't seem to be afraid of Sabretooth's threats to skin her alive, Spider-Man returns just as Victor is set to pounce on her. The two tussle, and Peter leaves Victor crying out when he shoots him in the face with his webbing. Victor rips the webbing off his face, in the process doing damage with his own claws, proving that not only is Spider-Man stronger than Sabretooth this time around, but he seems to be quite a bit smarter too. Like, Victor, you did that to yourself. What you doing? Number 4, Wolverine. Spider-Man and Wolverine have always had a kind of frenemy status, often finding it hard to see eye to eye on things. They've traveled through time and space together, swapped bodies, and been forced to go on all kinds of adventures together. They also both seem to have a thing for MJ, which has gotten Logan into trouble more than once with Peter Parker. In the video game Spider-Man Web of Shadows, however, it's the fact that Wolverine thinks Spider-Man smells off that prompts him to fight him. What Logan is actually smelling is a symbiote within Peter Parker, but still Logan is hesitant to trust Spider-Man, choosing to question him instead, while you as Spider-Man are forced to fight against him. Logan believes that the symbiote has taken control of you. Being, of course, that you are the protagonist in the game, you end up coming on top and convincing Wolverine that you are in fact the real Peter Parker, and that you are the one in control between you and your symbiote, despite what he may or may not smell. You also have to answer a lot of questions during that fight. Number 3, Iceman. Also coming at us from Marvel Team Up is another popular and original member of the X-Men team, Bobby Drake, aka Iceman. Spider-Man manages to smash through Iceman's ice slide, making him fall and easily defeating him. Spidey even suggests to Iceman that he and Human Torch should hang out more because both seem to have a lot to learn. Ooh, sick burn, pun intended. And you know, in the 70s, this may actually have been true, as Spider-Man has already proved his mettle at this point by taking on the entire Fantastic Four team as well. Spider-Man just kicks everybody's butt. Number 2, Colossus. Known as being the strongest member of the X-Men, even Colossus was no match for Spider-Man. This fight happened in the Secret Wars series out of the 80s in issue number 3. He takes out Colossus in one panel. Granted, Spider-Man also seems to have the element of surprise on his side here. Professor X has only just managed to warn everyone that he senses Spider-Man while Spider-Man is in the process of dropping in. He defeats Colossus in one panel using his webbing to blind him, because for those of us who are used to seeing, not being able to see, I guess is kind of everybody's weakness. So there you go, blind Colossus and you can defeat him. Number 1, all of the X-Men. And during this fight in Secret Wars, Spider-Man ended up taking on and defeating all of the X-Men as well, at least all of the X-Men that were there at the time. Considering that Peter Parker is known for being friends of quite a few mutants, it might surprise you to hear that he'd even battled the X-Men. But this was during their time on Beyonder's Battle World, where Spider-Man had just overheard them discussing mutant oppression and joining with Magneto. And you know, Magneto's a bad guy. So this just rubbed Spidey the wrong way, and he decided to attack, revealing that he'd heard their plan and he was gonna rat them out. I mean, I get why he attacked them to stop them, but confessing you're gonna rat them out seems like a bad move. He dodges attacks from Cyclops and Storm, swats Wolverine out of the way with one hand, ties up Rogue and hangs her from a pipe, and sticks Nightcrawler in a spot where his teleportation abilities appear to be disabled. This is the defeat that I was talking about earlier for Kurt, by the way. It was pretty impressive, and at the end of it, he left Logan, if you can believe it, actually remarking how lucky the X-Men were that that was all that Spider-Man had done to them. In his opinion, it could have been way worse. Of course, Xavier did manage to at least wipe Spider-Man's memories of the conversation just as he was getting away, proving that Spider-Man is still no match for a powerful psionic mutant.